name is Isaac Kalumbu. I am an ethnomusicologist. I originally come from Zimbabwe. I have studied ethnomusicology, so I am what's known as an ethnomusicologist. My area of specialty is African American music and also urban African popular musics. So I work at Michigan State University as Assistant Director in the African Studies Center. I taught for about 12 years in the College of Music, where I taught undergraduate and graduate courses in ethnomusicology. So I come to the field of ethnomusicology as also an artist, a singer, and a songwriter. I'm my happiest when I'm making music. So I'm really honored to be here. I'm honored to be here to talk to you about the roots of hip hop music and how it leaves the concepts that build it from their roots in Africa, in the New World, and how it comes back to the continent of Africa and becomes a major phenomenon. And I'm joined here by my colleague, Mzia Clark, who will introduce herself in a minute. And I'm honored to be working with her because she's been doing some wonderful work on the African continent in regards to hip hop music. Mzia.
Thank you very much. So I am an associate professor of really hip hop studies, cultural studies, African feminist studies in the Department of African Studies at Howard University. So as you can imagine, we're very excited right now on the campus of Howard University. And so my work really kind of focuses on the use of hip hop as social commentary in Africa. And, you know, really looking at how hip hop artists have used it over the years to address social issues, to speak out against, you know, just kind of a host of things from corruption to women using it to speak out against patriarchy and sexism, you know, just it as a tool to kind of debate language issue, the language question, which has kind of come up again and again. And then, of course, I think, you know, relevant to this discussion today, its tool as a vehicle for Pan-Africanism. And so that's, you know, really been my focus of research really for the last, I'd say, 10 or 15 years. And I also teach the Hip Hop and Social Change in Africa course, which is a course that's taught at Howard University, but it's also a joint course between Howard and George Washington University. And I also am the producer and host of the Hip Hop in Africa blog and podcast.
All right. So the way we are going to do this is that I will start and then Mzia will give the second half of the talk. We have divided it up in such a way that I begin with the basics, the formal musical elements that go into hip hop. And then Mzia is going to be talking about the music on the continent itself and give you examples of research from her work. And so the topic of African music is a broad one, and the continent of Africa is broad, and it is not a monolithic construct. It is actually quite diverse. And yet there are some things, there are some themes, particularly in the construction of music, that run through Africa that we find common in most African regions. And the music we are talking about, hip hop, was created by African Americans in the Bronx in the early 1970s, but it had its roots, its cultural roots are African. And my job today is to explore some of those African aesthetic and constructive principles that go into the making of African American music. Now, I say African American music because these concepts are prevalent in almost all African American music forms. They're just manipulated in different ways and in different styles, in different genres. But the basic building blocks, the basic building principles are common across African American music. So what are these concepts? The first concept one would have to talk about when talking about African music is that of communality. Communality, the idea that Africans approach music making and performance from a community perspective. In other words, you do not have a single superstar on stage making the music while everybody else is just listening and then appreciating at the end of the piece. The idea is that everyone present has a part to play in the making of music. Everyone present either is singing or dancing, hand clapping, playing an instrument. There is a role for everyone. And this formal structure of African music is such that it allows for everyone to participate. So the formal elements, the constructive principles, how the music is put together, is done with that idea of communality in mind. So take, for instance, the idea of call and response. Call and response. This is a key concept in African music. A lot of African, especially vocal music or songs, are call and response. Somebody will make a call and others will respond to what the call is. So you might have an example where somebody sings a song, makes a call, and the group call a response. Or you might have two groups, one group calling, the second group responds. Call response also takes place with instruments. Somebody could be playing guitar and then there is another instrument that responds. It might be a saxophone, or it might be a keyboard. Or it could be you are having a situation where a singer and an instrumentalist are trading phrases. The singer makes a call, the instrumentalist responds. So you find that in a lot of, if you listen to B.B. King, for example, he might do it on his own. He might, when he used to play on his guitar that he called Lucille, he would call with the voice and Lucille would answer by guitar, call and response. Perhaps in the American landscape, one of the most popular examples of call and response would be James Brown's I'm Black and I'm Proud song. I don't know how many of you know that song. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud. That's call and response. That aspect of African music is very important in the aesthetic and the formative elements that go into the creation of African music. So you can see how that brings in the community. You don't have one person dominating the event. You have a caller and everybody else responds. African music songs, I can give you an example of a call and response song. Zinkandia ni wawa, that's a call. Zinkandia ni wawa, and then the response. Anyamata wagugana nkosi alamula. O zinkandia ni wawa, the response. Zinkandia ni wawa, that's the group answering. Anyamata wagugana nkosi alamula. Then the leader comes back again. Nkosi alamula kumene. Zinkandia ni wawa, nkosi alamula, and so forth. So that gets everybody participating. Then another part that's important in African music is what are known as polyrhythms. Rhythm is a very important aspect of African music. It's very rhythmic. It emphasizes the manipulation of silences and tones. So rhythm is very central to African music. It's a rhythmic music. Rhythm is connected to another quality of African music making called percussiveness. Percussiveness. So rhythm and percussiveness, these are important, especially in the concept of hip hop. They're really, really crucial in the sense that when we say percussiveness, we are saying that sometimes people are playing on an instrument that is not a melodic instrument, but they play it percussively. And again, I go to international popular music or to US popular music, things that you know. if you know about funk music and think about the guitar in funk music, a guitar is supposed to play melodies. It is a melodic instrument, and yet you have funk musicians playing on it in a percussive way. You've heard that in funk music, I take it, and that is a percussive approach to playing a melodic instrument. You can even hear that in horns. Those instruments are meant to play flowing melodies in the Western culture, but in the hands of African-derived peoples, they are used percussively. There's a percussive approach. So percussion, rhythm, I'm reminded by our great bass instructor here at Michigan State University, Rodney Whitaker, who once said, he's a bass player, but he once said, we are all drummers. What he meant by that was that the way in which he approaches the bass was though as if he was a drummer. So that rhythm percussive element is very, very key when you look at hip hop. Then the issue of improvisation is another key aspect in African music making, not only in the on-spot creativity that takes place, not only in the improvisation with melody and rhythm and combination of dance and movement and storytelling and that sort of thing, but also even in the idea that people get more out of things that were meant for one purpose, but they can get them to do a little extra. An example would be the concept of scratching in hip hop. Scratching when the DJ scratches on the turntable, that type of thing that they do when they play with the turntable. A turntable is meant to only play music back, but they are turning a turntable into a musical instrument, into a source of a unique sound. So that is the improvisatory element that transcends not just the music sound itself, but also the practice of music. You get more from a bass than you normally do. Take Larry Graham. Larry Graham, who is the uncle of the popular rapper Drake. He was the originator of the slap bass, the concept of slapping on the bass. That kind of sound you get out of the bass, that is also improvisation. He says that he learned to do that because a drummer had not shown up for a church event. And then he was the one playing guitar and he had to improvise and get a percussive sound. And finally, slap bass was created. It has become a whole huge phenomenon. So improvisation is very, very central, not only to hip hop, to the vast genres of African and African-derived musics. Examples I'm giving you are, of course, coming from hip hop. Then comes the concept of dance. African music almost always is about dance. Africans don't make music just to listen to it. Usually dance is involved and elaborate dances are involved, depending on the style and genre. And then another important part of African music is the spoken word, orality, or the storytelling. Spoken word, orality, or the spoken word. Or storytelling. This is because it is connected to yet another aesthetic principle in African music, which is function. Function, function, function. If there is any element about African music that needs to be emphasized, it is that of function. That stands right next to communality. Communality and function. Why do I say this? Because Africans make music because of something else, not because of the music itself. They make music when a child is born to celebrate the birth of a child. They make music when that child is named. They make music when that child grows and there's a rite of passage. They make music in the context of marriage, when the person gets married. They make music when the person passes away. But they also make music during work. They make music for celebrations. They make music when harvests come in. They make music when there is famine. They make music when there are troubles in society. This really emphasizes the significance of music in African life. Because of the ubiquitous nature of music, it has been noted that indeed African music plays a significant role. It is a very functional form. For this reason, a lot of the popular music in Africa is not just about I love you, darling, which is what you find in the West. You know, most of the pop songs are about relationships of boy and girl. Nothing wrong with that. But in Africa, you will not be a successful popular music artist if that's all you sing about. You know, people want to hear you talk about their lives, their everyday experiences. Can you advise people? Can you help people solve issues? Can you help people solve problems in their lives? Do you represent them in their struggles? Are you, to be one of them, you must really be talking about salient issues of survival, of life, of, you know, righting wrongs, you know, fixing where people have misunderstandings, bringing peace, that type of thing. That one unique element of African popular music, because it comes from this whole notion of the importance of functionality. Now, I want to show you a little bit of music before I continue here. And the way I'm going to do it is I'm going to show you what polyrhythms are. I have shown you what call and response is. I want to show you what polyrhythms are, just so that you have a basic understanding of this. This is very important because hip hop uses a lot of polyrhythms. And you know, one of the biggest innovators in hip hop, who people don't talk so much about, was James Brown. Most people, they credit him for soul music, godfather of soul. Okay, that's good. But it is important to note that James Brown was the originator of the first drum pattern that came up in hip hop. You know, on the drums, and he was also instrumental for transforming soul into funk. But one of the ways he did that was that with that popular drum pattern in hip hop that was. You see that in a lot of hip hop songs. Of course, hip hop has changed. Today, it's not really using those kinds of rhythms, but I'm talking about the 70s into the 80s. That was a very central rhythmic pattern that hip hop adopted from funk. But what I'm getting at is the importance of polyrhythmic articulation. Because while that is going on, you have a bell being played somewhere else. You have a shaker going on, being played somewhere else. You have various percussive instruments being played at the same time. That is polyrhythm. The best example of polyrhythm is a music called go-go. I don't know how many of you are familiar with that. It's a music that was developed around the Washington, DC areas in the late 70s. You know, if you go to the DC area, they have these festivals and people are playing go-go songs, and it's amazing. Funk-based, but very percussive. So I want to share with you some very basic examples of how polyrhythms are created. And those polyrhythms are the basis of a lot of African and African-derived music forms. Again, it's important to note that that's how hip-hop draws from this reservoir of African musical aesthetics, let's put it that way. So let's see if you hear me when I play on improvisation. We talked about improvisation. So I'm going to improvise. I have 2 drumsticks here and I have a table. My table is going to become my drum set. So I want to see if you hear me. Do you hear me if I do this? Do you hear it? Yes, no? Shake your head if you hear it. Okay, good. Great. All right, wonderful. Thank you so much. So here is a basic pattern. And in this basic pattern, I'm going to be showing you 2 things. One, I'm going to show you call and response, but I'm also going to show you polyrhythms. So keep that in mind as we do this, okay? So here is the call. That's pattern 1. That's the call. Now here comes the response. Back to the call. Response. So we have one pattern calling and another pattern responding. So I'll play both of them together. So you have your call and your response pattern. Now we can add a 3rd pattern on top of that. And that could be the response to, if we take pattern 1 and 2 and call them one call, then that 3rd one becomes the response to the 1 call that is joined together. Are we together? So this, instead of this, listening to this as 2, now listen to it as 1. Now it is. Okay, so the 3rd part would be. So here goes. I'll start again. Are you still hearing me? You're not hearing me. Okay, let me try this. Let's see if this works. Are you hearing that? Do you hear that when I do that? Is that better? No? Wow, I've done this before and it's worked before. Let me try it one more time.
Hold on, somebody I think had a comment.
Is that better?
Hold on.
Huh?
Hold on, somebody I think wanted to make a comment. I don't know if I can ask. Okay, hold on. I don't know how.
Yes. So if you, as the person who's presenting, Dr. Columbo, if you have it where you can enable the original sound, it will stop Zoom from cutting out when you play something percussive.
Okay, so how do I enable to stop it from?
When you look at your little microphone and there's a little arrow and you click on audio settings, it pulls up another window and you click advanced. And then there's a little checkbox that says show in meeting option to enable original sound, and check that box.
So I am at audio. I don't see advanced.
It should be in like the bottom right corner.
Oh, right.
At the very.
Okay, I clicked on show in echo cancellation. Show in meeting option, enable original sound for microphone. Okay.
So then once you've checked that box, on your Zoom screen in the top left corner now, there should be something that says turn on original sound, and that should stop Zoom from cutting out.
Select a microphone to always optional. Okay. Well, hopefully this does it. Am I in? All right. Hey, thank you so much, Alisa. I appreciate you giving us that tutorial there that helped solve the problem. Now I can make sense. Okay, so let's start all over. Here is the original call pattern. So do you get that? Now here is the answer. Call. Answer. We wanna, so we go. Now we want to add a third pattern to those two. Okay, so we started with one pattern, then we added one pattern on top of the first one, then we added a third pattern, and you could tell that when three were playing, the texture was busier, right? The texture, that's what they call thick texture in African music. Thick texture because of the layering of variety of rhythmic patterns. That's just a basic rhythm going on. You could add shakers and bells and all sorts of other instruments on top of that. That's what creates a polyrhythmic, thick texture feel to the music. And as I said, that's also an example of call and response, because you cannot play the other pattern if you're not responding to what's going on before. So polyrhythms is not just the presence of many rhythms going on at the same time. It's many rhythms going on at the same time to make a piece of music, because you can make many rhythms go on at the same time and not make music. So that's an important point to emphasize. The final thing that needs our attention before I hand over to my colleague Muzia is the importance of orality, oral traditions. In African music, oral traditions are really significant. They form a very central part of the performance of music. And in hip hop draws largely from praise poetry. In Africa, praise poetry, almost every ethnic group that I know of has some kind of praise poetry. Praising people that were great ancestors, or praising kings, a man saying praise poetry to his wife, or a wife saying praise poetry to her husband. That is part of the African tradition. There's, even a mother can say praise poetry to thank her son who has come home with something, who has been victorious somewhere, and who has been successful, who has done something positive, who has brought a special gift to her. She will use praise poetry to show her appreciation. So praise poetry is very key in African traditions. Also, young men who are out there herding cattle use the spoken word, you know, in half sung and half spoken ways to play and to entertain one another. There is also the use of praise poetry at funerals. When the deceased have departed, people use praise poetry, praising their clan, praising their deeds. You know, it's very central to the culture. Also, even at marriages, you know, the person who can speak, who's talented at talking, is usually the person who's chosen to become the go-between between the two families, because orality is so valued. The ability to use metaphors, proverbs, you know, riddles, all sorts of tools and techniques of folklore. When you can manipulate that in a proceeding or in a legal matter or in a conflict, your use of language is very important. It's very persuasive to listeners. Somebody that speaks in rich language is likely to be listened to because within that rich language lie the wisdom and the values and the principles of the lives of a particular ethnic group. Now, so storytelling is part of this whole oral culture. The ability to tell stories that are funny, that are educational, that warn people, but that are entertaining and fun. So another thing, and then there are some other subcategories of this oral culture, such as boasting. In the African American culture, when somebody is talking about their own exploits and how good they are at XYZ and so on and so forth, the boasting is something that happens a lot, along with toasting, where you are praising somebody else for what they are doing and or who they are and the kind of things that they do that are admirable. Then you have other cultural traditions that are African American specifically. We think of signifying. Signifying. It's not divorced from the African culture. It is very much connected to it because I, growing up in Zimbabwe, knew about signifying. I didn't know that our African American cousins called it signifying, but I knew of it. And signifying is when you are talking about somebody in their presence as if they were not there, yet everybody knows who you are talking about. Okay? That's very ubiquitous in Southern African cultures, and I know that that is the case in East and West Africa, where you can actually poke fun of somebody in their presence and, you know, describe certain phenomena, and people will know who you are talking about. But nobody will say, oh yeah, you're talking about Jane or you're talking about Peter or anything like that. You know, it's a way of indirectly putting someone down, and they can come back at you doing the same thing. So it's a game of wits, if you like, in that sort of regard. Then another concept outside signifying is dozens. Now dozens are a little bit more direct, but they're connected to Africa as well. If you really want to make an African person mad, what you do is you talk about their women. If you talk about their mother or their sister, that is the way to get them mad, and the fight will break out very, very quickly. But with the dozens, the point of it is to see who can use words and not be provoked to a fight. In other words, it's a battle of wits. So, you know, your mama so heavy, she went on a scale and it said, one person at a time, please. You know, that type of thing. And you know, you come back with your own to hit back. You know, your mama so old, she went to school, Jesus Christ. You know, so those are traditions that are in the African cultures. You know, you go to Trinidad and Tobago, you find these same traditions in something called Pikong, where women fight, not physically, but, you know, they throw scorn at each other using hidden messages and hidden language, but you know, it's known to whom the missile is directed by what's said, you know, that sort of thing. So it comes, orality is so central to how hip hop artists then you created music that drew from these cultures. So what I've done here is to go through a sweep of the reservoir, the African musical, cultural, aesthetic reservoir from which hip hop draws. But the key thing to understand about these things is that these values were passed on from generation to generation, and each generation fashioned these aesthetics in whatever way they did for whatever music they were creating at the time. So as a result, you will find these musical aesthetics in such musics as the African American spiritual. You will find them in jazz. You will find them in the blues. You'll find them in rhythm and blues. You'll find them in soul. You'll find them in funk music. You'll find them in hip hop. And hip hop was created out of a DJ culture, you know, in the Bronx in the early 1970s. And there was an introduction or a contribution by Jamaicans who also had the same sort of oral traditional culture in Jamaica, and were already doing what in Jamaica they call toasting, you know, talking over music as a DJ in a dance hall. They call that toasting, and today now the toasters are called DJs, who are the equivalent of US rappers. So one major such toaster or DJ was U-Roy, who came to the United States, whose music came to the United States via people like DJ Kool Herc and also live performances, and began to influence young people in the Bronx, who then took the style and adapted it to funk music, which was their music, and sang or spoke over the breaks in those long funk songs, you know, and that is how you started to see the rebirthing of these styles. Yes, U-Roy, big respect. Somebody's bigging up U-Roy there in the chat. Now, final point I'm going to make has to do with the movement back to the continent of Africa. And it's not a surprise that this music finds an audience in Africa for two basic reasons. And after that, I will stop. The first reason why this music finds an audience in Africa, somebody can say, oh, well, hip hop is popular everywhere in the world, and even in China, there are hip hop artists. Why are you making a special case for Africa? Well, yes, hip hop is popular everywhere in the world, other than, everywhere in the world, including places like China and even further. But in Africa, hip hop has a special audience for two reasons. The first one is that the musical aesthetics in hip hop are not alien or strange or unheard of. African audiences find musics of the New World already palatable to their ears because they use some of the basic ingredients of African music. So that music is easier accepted by Africans because of the similar musical aesthetics. That's point number one. Point number two has to do with socio-economic and political factors regarding Blackness in the world today. The consciousness of the fact that Black people in the United States have been oppressed, and I'm speaking specifically for, say, places like Southern Africa, where I come from, where we grew up with apartheid. Part of the reason why we accepted African American music or Jamaican music so readily and so easily was because we were aware of the oppression of Black people in the West. We were aware of their struggles. after slavery, through Jim Crow laws, through the civil rights movement, through the fact that blacks were not regarded as equal. So that resonated with us because as I sit here, I grew up in apartheid Rhodesia, just north of South Africa, where I could not go to school with white kids, where I grew up seeing whites only signs for bathrooms and for waiting rooms and for restaurants. So when we were hearing of the struggles in the United States, we had a connection to those struggles. When we were hearing the lyrics in the songs, including Say It Loud, I'm Black and I'm Proud, that meant something to us. So there is yet a second reason besides the aesthetics, the social political consciousness. Okay? So when Bob Marley is singing Get Up, Stand Up and Fight for Your Rights, that makes so much more sense to us than maybe somebody who's in France, who is of French origin. Yes, the song is great and it's lovable and it's great music. They will also like it. But our connection to it may differ slightly because of those social political considerations. So the coming back of African-derived musics to the continent has to do with those two basic principles, that there were aesthetic reasons and then there were also social political reasons. With that, I end my presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you for that. So I'm going to shift to looking at kind of what happens when hip hop comes to the continent. And I'm really going to focus on two aspects. One is focusing on hip hop when it comes to the continent, but also really kind of looking at the, use of hip hop in Africa, well, specifically the way I've used hip hop in Africa as a tool of pedagogy. And so I think that one of the things that's been interesting in terms of doing this presentation, this is the first time I've ever kind of talked about this topic with K-12 educators. I've talked about it before, but never with K-12 educators. And what's interesting is because a lot of what I learned about bringing it into the classroom was using techniques that I found through doing research on what K-12 educators were doing. So it's very interesting kind of how, we learn from each other and everything. So hopefully that aspect of the presentation you will also find useful. So in terms of looking at, we now have established the connection to Africa, the connection that hip hop has. Now, when hip hop kind of returns to Africa, it has a huge impact on the youth. And it really resonated with the youth for all of the things that Isaac said, but also because of hip hop structure. So hip hop lends itself to speaking truth to power. So for many other genres of music, you have, this tradition of hiring professional songwriters, and, you have folks that kind of come in and, it's very common in, like, for example, R&B or, rock and roll or other genres of music for someone to take a song that was written by someone else and perform it. Now, while hip hop's commercialization has meant that that is true now in hip hop, the origins of hip hop are the artist is supposed to write their own lyrics. That has always kind of been the foundation of hip hop. And so that has just kind of from its origins made hip hop different than some other genres. So artists were writing lyrics that were raw, honest, that completely dismissed any respectability politics. One artist, the early artists had no expectations of record deals. They were like, there was no expectation that anyone is going to put this on a radio station. And so that gave them this certain level of freedom to just rap about whatever it is they wanted to rap about, and using whatever language that they felt that they were using with their friends. And so they were very raw and honest about their experiences, and in ways that were organically political. So by simply talking about your disenfranchisement, your condition, that can be a political act. And so when that music got to Senegal and South Africa, where youth gravitated to hip hop earlier than anyone else on the continent. So South Africa and Senegal were the first countries in Africa where you found youth not only listening to the music first, because there were other countries you could argue, and it's really hard to determine who exactly heard hip hop first. You have 54 countries. I mean, it's impossible to know where the first cassettes landed. We will never know that. But the first artists who really began to record their own narratives were out of Senegal and South Africa. And one of the reasons is when hip hop comes to those countries, it's during political turmoil. So in Senegal, you had the schools were closed. So, as educators, you might be interested in knowing that. So the schools were closed, there were strikes going on, the students weren't in school, and they were, angry. And in South Africa, of course, we know South Africa was under apartheid rule. So this is the late 1970s, early 80s. So South Africa's under apartheid rule. And so these environments made it right for hip hop, but they would also fundamentally impact the trajectories of hip hop in those two countries. Senegal remains one of the most political hip hop scenes in the world. They have probably one of the largest number of hip hop artists in the world. I mean, Senegalese, part of hip hop is bragging and boasting. And so Senegalese will tell you, oh, we've got like 5,000 MCs. And, I don't know that it's true, but they have a significant number of hip hop artists in Senegal. Senegal also has one of the only countries that has a graffiti festival, Festigraph. It happens, I think, every 2 years, every 3 years. And it's just a festival, where they celebrate the element of graffiti, which is one of the elements of hip hop. And I think one of the things that I do want to stress is that while we are focusing primarily on music, the other elements of hip hop were also imported and embraced into or returned to Africa. So, you've got the music, the rappers, but you also have the DJ, which is an element, the graffiti artist, which is an element, the breakdancer, which is an element. And then many people would say that the fifth element of hip hop is knowledge of self. And I think that all of those elements came to Africa. And so many of the first hip hop artists were breakdancers because it was the cheapest thing you could be. You just needed cardboard. And so you could be a breakdancer. You didn't need recording equipment, you just needed cardboard. And so, and Senegal also is one of the African countries where graffiti is not illegal. Whereas in South Africa, in other countries, Nigeria, Ghana, you're not going to be doing graffiti. Like you're just, so graffiti culture never took off in Ghana and South Africa. If you look at the history of Ghana and South Africa and kind of some of the repressive regimes that rose up, it was very dangerous to even attempt to do graffiti in Ghana or Nigeria. Whereas in Senegal, there was kind of this encouragement of it. They saw it as this beautification of the city. And so you had graffiti culture that thrived in Senegal. And so again, all of this would impact the trajectory of hip hop in both Senegal and in South Africa. Both of those countries have had very active hip hop cultures, very political elements, while South Africa has also kind of had a very commercial hip hop scene they have still maintained very political elements to their hip hop scenes. So hip hop in South Africa emerged in Cape Town, South Africa, specifically in the neighborhood of Mitchell's Plain, which is in the Cape Flats area of Cape Town, which is in the colored community of Cape Town. And it's, you know, still remains an area where they're very serious about their hip hop culture. You still have a lot of festivals, and you know, you have a lot of hip hop radio stations there. So hip hop's kind of, you know, overall return to Africa ultimately finds youth embracing the culture's roots and social commentary to express their own conditions in cities that are, you know, overcrowded. Every urban area, you know, we could kind of get into this conversation about urbanization. So you got the 1980s, you have droughts in certain parts of Africa, you have, you know, the rise of some not so great characters to government in certain countries. You've got certain structural adjustment programs that do more harm than good in certain countries. So you have a lot of people coming to the cities, massive urbanization. So you've got these overcrowded cities, not enough jobs. So you got a lot of unemployment, schools that, you know, really can't handle the influx of all these young people. And so people are talking about that. The widespread corruption that youth are witnessing. Corruption in social and political institutions is basically endemic. And so basically conditions that mirror what is happening with Black and Latino youth in the United States. So if you look at the 1970s, 1980s New York, it was, I mean, you know, now we can look at Times Square and like, oh, this is so beautiful. 1970s Times Square was not the place to be. 1970s South Bronx was not the place to be. Burnt out tenement buildings. You know, the crack epidemic was hit the 1980s really hard, especially the inner city Black communities. You didn't have kind of the migration patterns. You had, you know, that migration pattern in the United States. You know, you really kind of had that waning off in the 1970s, where the South to North migration, but you did have many of those who were the ones who would create hip hop were the children and grandchildren of the Great Migration. So you still kind of had the migration impacting the creation of hip hop. So, you know, you've got all of these similarities, these parallels, in addition to what we heard earlier, that you have these kind of musical linkages that would also kind of bring Africans to the music. So hip hop culture becomes this vehicle for social commentary. And for women in Africa, it provided a whole new set of tools to challenge patriarchy. So African feminisms are strong across Africa. So you know, there you have that. But hip hop provides additional tools. And there are tools that resonated with a lot of young women and girls. And already, to be a woman in hip hop culture, you almost have to be a feminist. Hip hop is very, as we know, misogynist and sexist, and, you know, a very masculine space. And so to exist in that space as either a fan or an artist, you have to kind of push back. And so you began to see women using that as a tool to push back against patriarchy and to really assert their own feminism within hip hop. And so, you know, we have seen that. And so another thing in terms of, you know, kind of looking at Pan-Africanism, hip hop has also become a natural vehicle for the spread of Pan-Africanism as both an idea as well as an identity. And so, you know, we've heard about how African hip hop is, you know, we could talk about the drum beats. We've heard about the call and response, the, you know, the collaborations, the kind of communal nature of hip hop. All of that is, you know, has lent itself to hip hop being kind of this natural incubator for Pan-Africanism. So you have artists like Blitz the Ambassador, who now I think goes more by Blitz Bazawule, which is his legal last name. He's a Ghanaian artist who has been, writing about his identity as a Ghanaian, but also his experience in Brooklyn, New York, where he, came after high school. And he was, his film, the Burial of Kojo, was noticed by Ava DuVernay and was distributed by her company, made it to Netflix. He was one of the co-producers on Beyonce's Black is King project. Now he's going to be no, I think not co-director, the director of the film adaptation of the musical Color Purple. So, that puts him with Oprah. So he's like Ava, Beyonce, Oprah. So he's got the trifecta of Black women, so that's everybody's dream. But in each of these projects, he is inserting Ghana, he is inserting Africa. And so we know if we see Black is King, that's Africa is all through Black is King. And even though Black is King is not expressly a hip hop project, we do see that influence. The Black Panther project, the soundtrack had some hip hop artists there. There was a hip hop artist that produced the soundtrack. So we're seeing this kind of natural coming together that's not like someone saying, let's do this for Pan-Africanism. It's just happening. And it's happening because of all the things that we've talked about. And so hip hop, as a result, is challenging existing models of Pan-Africanism. And there has been resistance from people who prefer the traditional models of Pan-Africanism, but the culture is moving forward and rolling right over that resistance and continuing on with those collaborations. And they're like, yeah, we see you, but we're going to keep on going because we've got stuff to do. And so, Kendrick Lamar, thank you. Oh my gosh, I'm such a fan of Kendrick Lamar. I mean, and his whole experience when he did To Pimp a Butterfly, which he wrote while he was in South Africa. I mean, there's just so many things. And I'm doing this project now. I'm doing this annotated mixtape of hip hop artists of African descent in the US. And through that, I found out Nipsey Hussle is Eritrean. And I didn't even know that. I was like so surprised. Like, I just kind of blew my mind. Like, I didn't know. But then when I look, I was like, okay, yes, he looks Eritrean. Like, when you look at his physical features, he looks very Eritrean. So I'm looking at other people like Doja Cat, who is somebody the freshmen in my class know, find out she's South African. So there are all of these things I'm learning about, these like second generation artists that are here that are very much into the mainstream, and they're bringing Africa with them. And so it's just kind of what that means for all of this stuff. And so they're bringing that into the mainstream American hip hop scene. And so, yeah, so it's a very exciting time. As you can see, I'm very excited. So in terms of looking at hip hop in Africa as pedagogy, basically, I initially wanted to find a way to engage students in the research I was doing and to use hip hop to engage them in learning about Africa. And I knew that they could navigate the internet better than me, that they could find a lot of information better than me. And so basically, I went online, and most of the information, quite honestly, that I found on how to do this was K-12 educators that figured out and were using innovative ways on how to use blogging and podcasting in the classroom. And I was like, well, I'm gonna, copy paste to my lesson plan. So I was like, I'm gonna use this, and it was amazing. And so that's how the Hip Hop African blog got started. And then later the podcast, because I'm an avid podcast listener. Again, I went back and to find out what other academics were doing in terms of podcasting in the classroom, and learn how to make that also a class project for students to do. And so there are a lot of online resources also for using hip hop in the classroom. A lot of them honestly, and giving credit where credit is due, the first resources on using hip hop in the classroom was aimed at K-12 educators. It was not necessarily aimed at universities. And so a lot of it I had to kind of to sometimes adjust for the university setting. But a lot of it was, very, very useful. And so, I really kind of use that, and that helped in creating the in-person class. So I created the Hip Hop in Africa, or Hip Hop in Social Change in Africa class, and it's so far from what I know, it's the first Hip Hop in Africa class, university class in the States. And I haven't heard of others. I know there are others that look at internationally hip hop. I don't know of any others that looks just solely at Africa. But now the blog is getting a lot of traffic from other learning management systems. So we see a lot of traffic coming in from Moodle, from Blackboard sites, from other, and not just universities, but also public schools, public school systems. And so that has been really exciting. And that's something that we wanted. So in 2019, we teamed up with the Center for African Studies at Howard University to create a short online version of the in-person class. And so we created the Hip Hop in Africa course in iTunes U as a test course, but it is a live course. And so I want to share some of the resources that are there. Again, it started off as a test course. Unfortunately, you do have to have like an iPad or iPhone to access it. We have applied for funding to expand it, to make it accessible, well, to move it to other platforms. I mean, there are a couple of reasons. One, iTunes, Apple is discontinuing iTunes U at the end of 2021. And I found that out like a couple of weeks ago. So I'm not very happy about that. But it also forces us to find other platforms that are more accessible. And so one of the things that we want to do is make sure it is always free, because we never want it to be anything that anyone has to pay to access, but we also want to make it self-contained. So it doesn't have to be something someone has to come in and teach, where it's something that educators can pick and choose what they will say, okay, I want to take this module and teach this module, that they can do that. Or if they want to themselves take that module, then they can. And so we're working on that, but I know that the Center for African Studies at Howard, their website is going to have whatever the updated information as soon as we kind of figure that out. So I've been told we can, and I'm going to do this in like 5 minutes. I know, I thought I was talking fast and I wasn't talking fast enough. Okay, so I'm going to just kind of go through so you can see some of the things that are there. So basically the landing page, pull this down a little bit. Okay, so the landing page just gives information on the, basically it's the expected duration is 3 weeks. That just means that there are 3 basic modules, but it's, like I said, it's self-contained. There's no timer or anything. There's a syllabus. So the syllabus basically just gives you information on the goals of the course. And actually, a friend of mine who used a magazine template for her syllabus, I completely jacked her idea, and it's like, I'm going to use this for my syllabi from now on. And so I can't take it for it. So it gives you the modules, lets you know each module has a topic overview, readings. Each one has lectures, video lectures, lesson plans, which have activities, supplemental materials, websites that you can go to. Here, there are, books, films, podcasts. Again, we have the podcast there. And there's a breakdown of each of the topics. So we have hip hop and social change, women, gender, and hip hop culture, and language and hip hop. So those are the 3 modules that we have. And then we also have, so this is kind of the introduction page. Again, gives you the kind of course navigation. where you're able to see the goals, the elements, and there's an introduction video, the syllabus is there. And then each module, again, has, you know, the overview, so, you know, there's an overview for each one. It kind of tells you what's there. There are, you know, each one of these are readings. So most of these, what I try to do is have readings that didn't require you to have kind of access to like the university system to access like the academic, and also try to have readings that were like websites, or, you know, readings that didn't require you to go through like a university wall. And then there are lectures, and so I think I'll play a second or a minute of one, and then I'll show you what a lesson plan looks like. And there are additional resources. So those additional resources, again, are films and podcasts that you can access. And then, okay, so this is a lesson plan. So this is a lesson plan on hip hop and social change. And in this one, students write an original rap verse that deals with any social issue. So they have to have a verse of 16 lines. They'll have, you know, it says 30 minutes, but, you know, whatever. They can share their verse in class, and then they're going to discuss the issue that this class discusses, the social issues that the students in the class discuss the most, and what the bigger implications may be. So kind of like, okay, what did a lot of the students kind of discuss? And if you find that, wow, half the students talked about race, well, what are the bigger implications of that? Clearly there's something that, you know, bigger there that students may want to discuss. And then, okay, I'll definitely put, and so I will play, okay, what is this link? Okay, so there's also the resources here, but I'll play like just a second of the one of the lectures. Oh, wait. I think I have to share computer sound. Make sure that's view of the conversation around protest music and combat music that we find in chapter 3 of the book, Hip Hop in Africa, Prophets of the City and Dusty Foot Philosophers. And so this is an attempt to really kind of look at each of those concepts individually and specifically how they relate to hip hop in Africa. So protest music is probably the more common kind of music that deals with social issues, that addresses social issues. And so protest music speaks to the, okay, so that's, yeah, so that is that not so good about hearing my voice. So the link to this, so I actually, yeah, so I can find the link. I know I just sent it to, I'm gonna find the link. So while we're doing the Q&A, I'll put the link to this course in the chat, so that you can access it. But like I said, because of iTunes or Apple kind of doing whatever, they're going to make it so that, oh, I know where okay, so it is on the Center for African Studies website, Center for African Studies. So I'll put the link there. I'll get the link and do that. But yeah, so that is it for me. So I guess we can do Q&A.
Okay. Thank you, Mazia. I think it is important to get some feedback from our attendees here. Do you have any questions for either Mazia or myself? We have half an hour to answer your questions. And I guess you could put your questions in the chat here. Let me go to it to see if there are questions in the chat yet. There's a question here. Have you thought to make a K-12 module that teaches the parts of speech? I'm not sure to whom that question is directed, and I'm not exactly sure what's meant by parts of speech. That sounds like a linguistic concept or a linguistic term that talks about grammar and that sort of thing. I think from the perspective of what I spoke about, there are various subgenres of oral African culture that one can talk about, and I'm not sure if that's what is meant by that question. So do we have a module other than what Mzia has shared with you? MSU has what's known as Exploring Africa, and it does have a music section. You can go there and there will be, that's a great resource also, not only on music, but on Africa in general. So we have a variety of topics. It's quite cross-disciplinary and it's very helpful. We also have lesson plans under Exploring Africa. So I would urge you to go to it to use it in your classes as you prepare. Then there is a question here that says, can you speak on some Middle East scholars claiming that call and response is uniquely Arab? Well, that's a difficult one to tackle because, you know, one could, I guess any culture can claim to have been the originators of any of these things. I'm not going to say it's not true, but I don't have any reason to think that it is uniquely Arab. Because, I mean, if they mean in origin, perhaps, but they'd have to prove that it was originated there. But to say that call and response is uniquely Arab it would be a mistake, because it is the bedrock of African music making and has been for hundreds of years without Arabic influence. You know, unless that influence happened in the time before Christ or something like that, the call and response pattern is all across the African continent. And I don't know that there is much value in disputing or affirming such a statement, because I'm sure if you go to other parts of the world also, you'll find some call and response outside Africa. So, you know, let's see if there's another question. If that doesn't answer your question, please follow up with another one so that we can answer. Any free music making sites you recommend? Music making. I'm not sure that means free music making.
So I know that there are a couple of there's software and apps. So like I know Apple has GarageBand, which is great for and one of the things, I know we're not in person right now, which is really horrible, but the Apple stores, one of the things that they were really great with is if you brought students, and I don't know in terms of the age range, but bring in students and kind of say, oh, you know, we want to bring in students to kind of do a demo with GarageBand, and you can bring your students in, and like literally they will teach your students how to use GarageBand to make beats. And they're really, really great about that. Again, now we're not in person, so you know it's not possible, but that's one thing. Audacity, in terms of, because our students record their own podcasts, so they use Audacity also as one of the free softwares that they can download to create podcasts. So there's free software, and there's free apps that can be downloaded as well. Oh,
thank you for taking that question, because I wasn't clear. I didn't realize that. I'm taking everybody as a teacher, and I'm taking every question from the perspective of classroom teaching. So it threw me off. She's really actually talking about the actual making of music, which you answered well, Mzia. Thank you. Then there is the question here. Another question that I think you are best to answer with, Mzia, is Tanisha Dudley Williams wants to know what your opinion is on the direction of today's hip hop music.
Ooh, I think that's a really good question. I do think there's kind of a division between kind of more commercial music, and that is no longer under the control of the artist. You know, completely under the control of the artist. There's some control, artist control, but you do have another direction that is more independent. And so I think, like, if you look at women in hip hop, just in the US, you know, everybody knows Megan Thee Stallion and Cardi B, and they are kind of like, you know, the main artists, but there are like a dozen other women that are active producing records, and, you know, maybe about, I say half dozen that are actually making a living off of their music. And those are the artists that I would listen to really get a pulse of what's really happening. So I definitely think you've got kind of two hip hop cultures, one that's commercial and one that is, you know, kind of more independent. And the same thing is in Africa too. I think you have that, you know, especially in South Africa, you have those kind of diverging hip hop communities.
Okay, another question here, Mzia. What's your opinion on the thoughts of the recent resurgence of Pan-Africanism that you mentioned? Wondering how you think we disentangle recent Pan-Africanism from globalization, which I guess is to ask how much of more recent Pan-Africanism you think is driven by capitalism versus a desire for a true cultural exchange. Do you think it matters?
Yeah, it definitely matters. I think it matters. And I think that's one of the reasons why I think a lot of the folks that are kind of some of the traditional models of Pan-Africanism have been a bit critical of projects like Black is King because it's, you know, wrapped up in capitalism. But I think that there is still value in that, in the sense that young people who never would have even thought about Africa are thinking about Africa, talking about Africa, and even identifying with Africa. I mean, you had people that went to see Black Panther wearing dashikis that I surprised me in terms of people in my Facebook feed, and I was like, you never would have guessed that they would have worn anything African. So I do think that you have that residual effect that's important, and we can't minimize that. But I think that we should capitalize that. Like with the year of return, Ghana really tapped into that. 2019, they even did not expect so many African Americans to go to Ghana in 2019. I mean, the number of African Americans that visited Ghana, and I don't know what the numbers were, but they exceeded Ghanaian expectations. So I think that, and looking at your name, I'm not sure. I think you're Ghanaian. Just looking at your name. So some Ghanaians I know weren't happy because I know they said the price of everything went up. But now there's this move to get more people from the diaspora to move to the continent. So I think there's both. But I do think we do have to look at Pan-Africanism differently. We have to kind of shift our way of thinking and come up with newer models or different models.
Another question for you, Mzia. What are some African feminist hip hop artists you would recommend exposing students to?
Oh wow. Well, there's Dope St. Jude is one. She is the first queer out artist out of Cape Town, South Africa. Her music, she did Afropunk, the Afropunk Festival, and her music is on Netflix. One of the Netflix South African series, Blood and Water, is her song, is one of the theme songs. So Dope St. Jude is a great artist, and she's a feminist. Because some artists don't necessarily say that they are. So Dope St. Jude is great. She's South African, like I said. Gigi Lemaine is another South African artist. Munaya is a Senegalese artist. She raps in French, but she's also very feminist. And yeah, I could think of some more, but right now my brain is not working. But yeah, those are some to definitely look out for in terms of oh no, my brain isn't working. Oh wait.
I think Jessica, yes, suggests Maimuna Youssef, also known as Mumu Fresh.
Yes. How do you spell her name? Muna.
Maimuna, Maimouna, and Youssef, Youseff, also known as Mumu Fresh, Mumu Fresh.
No, I didn't spell it right.
So we have a couple of questions here.
Okay.
And one says, what are your thoughts on Cardi B's and other explicit music and how it influences youth today? That question is related to another that says, I find my 14-year-old son listening to current trap music, and the majority of the lyrics are disrespectful to women, which is so challenging for me to battle with him about. Is there just to be a voice for everything, or should hip hop artists have a moral compass?
I mean, I do think for me, I think that's a tough one. I know that this semester I had students write down the 3 songs this summer that were most influential, and a lot of them wrote the WAP song. And so we had a discussion, and a lot of them were able to kind of have, the first time I heard it, I was grossed out. But they had a very kind of intellectual response to it, and kind of their discussion of kind of the celebration of female sexuality, and the distinction between that and what men rap about is these were women rapping about their bodies versus men rapping about and objectifying women's bodies. I didn't necessarily 100% agree, but I had to honor that they were able to articulate their view, and that they weren't like, well, this just sounds nice, so they didn't give this bubblehead response. So I had to kind of honor that, even if I didn't necessarily agree with it. So yeah, it's a tough one. Like, I don't, some of that stuff I heard, like I said, I can't, that song is not, that's tough. It's tough.
There is a question here that says, are there African artists that you found are particularly accessible to American youths who may not have a lot of context or current issues in Africa, or artists who can be a gateway to youth exploring more African artists? Do we have African crossover artists to the United States?
I think, Isaac, you probably would know a lot, because I know that there are a lot of artists that are crossing over, right? Didn't you say?
Yes, that's a tough one for any foreign act to really influence youth in America. That has been an age-old tough thing to do. That's why in the 60s you had that British invasion, because you had these young people from England managing to come into the United States and change things musically here. The reason is because the United States is such a powerful music industry, and the United States is the exporter, not the importer of music. So it's really, really hard for an African artist or for any artist in the world for that matter, to make a big impact in the United States. But having said that, you have seen what's happening on, with Nigerian popular music, the hip hop from Nigeria, Burna Boy, becoming so influential.